Hmm. Excellent. Okay, perfect. Let's see if I can figure this thing out real quick here. You would think after 2.5 years, we'd have it down. All right. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see that? Perfect. Excellent. All right. So welcome. The inaugural FerskenED Education Edupreneur Mastermind. Once again, thanks for being here. Just a quick note. I think all of you know me, but I'm going to do just a quick intro to myself so you know who I am. Obviously, name is Chase Eskelton, and I am in my 10th year of formal education experience, if you will. 5 years prior was not in a school setting, but was working with students. So, 15 years if we're being technical, but 10 years of true school side of the education world. Heavy digital background. My background really started with virtual schools and has kind of ended most recently with blended programs. So been around a lot of different things. I'm an academic policy wonk, which means I'm the nerd that likes to go read the legislative bills and do all the fun stuff around those things. Spent several years with K-12 on their national policy and government affairs team. And I would say if I had to call out a specific strength, it would be school operations. Started with Texas Virtual Academy to help launch Texas Online Preparatory School and scale those two schools up from an education perspective. Pretty heavily involved in those areas. So the reason I'm here today is because grumble, QuickBooks. Nobody I know can figure out QuickBooks unless you're like the QuickBooks guru. So that was actually the conversation that started our whole mastermind. Man, I wish there was other people out there who I could commiserate with some of this stuff. And John is going to talk about a lot of that here in just a few minutes. So one thing I want to do is I want to ask, and if you can, grab the little chat box thing and give me a sentence or two explaining why you're here today. Mine is I want to be around other education nerds who, like I mentioned, they can commiserate together on what we're doing here.
Love it.
Oh, John Watson. 5 o'clock somewhere, buddy. All right. I see typing hands. So I'm going to give you just a second. Connect with other edupreneur thinkers. Yeah, Emily, we're a unique breed for sure. Learn as much as I can and get to know other people in industry. Fantastic. Thank you, Roger. It's a small world, but sometimes it gets fragmented. So this is a great opportunity for us to cross some of those boundaries that we might not see otherwise. Mara, starting a new company, educational innovation, and it can be lonely at times. That it can. It can.
Well, that's just you don't answer my phone calls, Chase.
I would never skip a Tamara phone call. I can promise you that. All right. I got started. I had an informal set of colleagues that I found incredibly helpful. Yeah, perfect. John, that's exactly what we're going for here. Perfect. All right, Tilly. Oh, I skipped one. Tilly. Love connecting with fellow travelers in the education space, navigating the space in the capacity as a consultant. And Tilly, you've done probably the best of all of us at crossing those borders. So that's fantastic. You're great at meeting those fellow travelers. All right, and Brandy, educator, edupreneur. All right, perfect. It can be isolating. Excellent. So again, thank you so much for being here. I trust that we're going to get a lot out of this. It's one thing to add another meeting to the books. My goal is not to make it another meeting, but to make it a group of like-minded people that are pushing forward. So I want to thank you all for giving me a few minutes of your time. One of the things that I was thinking about, and I hope that you'll give it some thought as well over the next week or two. I really want to get your feedback on what this should be and what it can be moving forward. And so I did a little bit of thought about this over the last couple weeks, and I came up with a rough mission statement and a rough vision statement, very rough. And John, I promise we're going to get to you so that in case you got to jump, you can. But I think it's really important that we set what is it that we're trying to do here. So I'm going to share with you what I came up with, but my goal is that you'll provide feedback over the next couple of weeks, and that we'll finesse this together, if that makes sense. So what I came up with roughly, the mission statement of our mastermind is exist to ensure student success, parent satisfaction, that should say exceptional business practices, not exception. You can see it's very rough. Obviously, man, I hate being the educator that makes the error, because now I'm being silently judged by everyone in this room. I get it. But those are the 3 points, right? We want to make sure that student success remains the forefront, that parent satisfaction remains high, and that we are building each other up with great business practices. Which drives me to my vision statement. It's to bring together education entrepreneurs to support and cheer each other on, contribute best practices, and share potential business deals that will drive toward better student success, parent satisfaction, and/or exceptional business practices. So I'm going to send you a copy of that when we're done, and I want you to really think about that. Where did I miss something, or how can we, reword that to make the most impact? Yeah, John.
Chase, if you don't mind me jumping in to your mission statement, I would consider putting the business practices first. And the reason I say it that way is I had another company once, and it had a very significant social mission, and it didn't survive. And so my point is, you're not going to do anything about ensuring student success or parent satisfaction if you don't take care of your business first. And I made that mistake in another line of business. It was a big lesson for me. I took a lot of time and lost a non-trivial amount of money to figure out that lesson. And sometimes, to me, it felt like what I learned was I had to do some things that felt selfish in the moment, because I had to take care of myself and my business first. And you need to give yourself permission to do that. And it can be particularly hard in a field like we're all in.
Yeah, that's fantastic feedback, John. I really appreciate that. All right. So I'll send this out. Think about it and send any edits, comments, criticisms, whatever, send it back so that next time that we all meet, we can go over that a little more formally. Perfect. All right. Okay, so quick agenda. We've got 4 items that we're going to cover, and I held the time for 90 minutes, mostly because I think that after we talk with John, there's going to be some getting to know each other, and that usually takes a little bit longer than normal. My promise to you is that I'm not going to waste your time, so it's going to be useful. And if we're done early, I'm not going to drag it on the full 90 minutes. Like when we're done, and we'll call it there. Sound good? Excellent. All right, so start with John. Quick group intros. Just a quick housekeeping and rules for the mastermind, and then a sneak peek into our March meeting. We've already got our speaker confirmed. I'm really excited about it. So without any further ado, John Watson, I hope it's okay that I snagged this picture offline. You look very, very formal, very professional in it.
Very much not like I look today.
Let me give a quick background. For those of you who don't know John, he is coming off hot from the old DLAC, which was last week. And I hope that we can maybe start there and you can give a quick review of that. But more than just DLAC, John runs the Evergreen Education Group. It's a small and successful company. He's had quite a few business failures, which we're going to dig into. I'm really excited to hear some of these stories, which gives John a really unique perspective. He's seen victory, he's seen defeat in the education business world. And I really can't stress enough how important it is that we learn not just the best things that we can do, but learn from those who failed and how to not do that again. So learning what not to do. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you for a minute. Tell us a little bit about Evergreen and DLAC and how that went last week.
Thanks, Chase. We exist as an organization. We're in the K-12 online blended and hybrid learning space, and I know some of you, and so you're familiar with some of that. We exist because we believe that digital learning can help students in terms of opportunities, outcomes, and that digital learning often doesn't do those things because it's poorly implemented, poorly planned, there's policies in the way, and that sort of thing. So that's the overall mission. Let me jump into a few just operational details to give you a sense of size and scope. And actually, I may share some things in this discussion that we don't typically share. So I would appreciate if you all consider this a private conversation. I know it's recorded and all that, but just to give you a sense of size and scope and history and that sort of thing. I started the company 21 years ago after leaving my last and maybe my only real job of my career. I was with an early learning management system company for all of 2.5 years back in the late 1990s. And I started consulting. And so all these things that we're doing now, even the fact that we've grown into having a role in the broader K-12 digital learning space, I'd love to say I saw where the field was going. I thought, oh, we need to be in that, and let's jump in and create a company. The reality was, in my last job, I ran out of vacation time halfway through the year. Like I said, it was my first job, and I was like, wait a second, I get no more vacation time. Like I said, I'd been a teacher, I'd been doing other things where I had a lot more control over my time. And I wanted to do some different things. So back then I was involved in an eco-travel business. I was doing some environmental consulting, and I was doing my own education consulting as well. In a lot of ways early on, it was a lifestyle choice. And one of the things that we can talk quite a bit about that I've since thought about a lot more than I did at the time was just the idea of, it might have been useful if I had taken less than 10 years to think really about what I wanted to do with Evergreen. But because I had all these other things going on, and I should say, it's not like I regret it. I was doing all sorts of things that I enjoyed, but it's really only over the last 8 to 10 years that I've been focused on growing the organization as a company. To give you a sense of size and scope, for a lot of years in terms of just revenue, we hovered around about $1 million a year in revenue, a little bit less a lot of years, occasionally a little bit more. In the past few years, related to some things I'll touch on momentarily, that's grown substantially. This past year was about 1.7, probably 2022 will be over 2 million. And there's a lot further growth potential there. In terms of, and I know we might dig into this further, but also just the size of the organization. We have, including myself, 5 employees now, and we tap into a lot of contractors. Over the life of the organization, I've had times where had as many as about 8 or 9 employees. Other times with revenue not dipping at all, that number dropped down to as low as 2. So I've always balanced between having employees and having contractors. These days we're focused in 3 areas. We run DLAC, the Digital Learning Annual Conference, which, as Chase mentioned, we just wrapped up last week with more than 1,000 people on site in Atlanta and almost 500 online. We run a membership group called the Digital Learning Collaborative. And then the third area is we do a fair bit of consulting with companies, state agencies, school districts, folks like that. Those 3 things all come together because we're running a conference and a membership group, we know a lot about what's happening in our field because we have all sorts of ways of gathering information. Like, for instance, people are submitting proposals about what they want to talk about, which means we know what they're doing and we know what they think is important and what they're interested in. So, and then we're able to turn around and use that information in some of the consulting work that we do. So, Chase, does that about cover the broad strokes? And I know, Tamara, I don't know if you want to add anything from your questions from your perspective, Tilly as well, anybody who wants to add anything specific, or especially those of you who know at least a little bit about us.
Yeah, I mean, it's really important to me that our speakers come in, we're going to talk about this later, that they're not doing a salesy thing. And John is fantastic, but I have to be salesy for him for a second, because if you haven't been to DLAC, I've got to ask you to consider it. It is so unique in the conference world I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. You know, you go to a conference in most instances, and it's like, here's a list of 100 30-minute topics, and like 3 of them maybe look interesting. But at DLAC, you've got some that are, how do you call it? Pechakucha? How do you say that word?
Pechakuchas, yeah.
Pechakucha. And how long are those?
6 minutes and 40 seconds.
Yeah.
That's all you get.
It's really unique to see and experience.
The fun part of creating DLAC was we started it, this was the 4th one that we just ran. So we started the planning 5 years ago. And like probably all of you, I've been to a lot of conferences prior, and I tended to think that most of them weren't very good. And starting something like that from the ground up gave us the room to say, okay, what would we actually want a conference to be? And as we've thought about over the years, it's felt like, well, people go to conferences, that there's basically broadly speaking, 2 personas. There's the kind of person who goes and wants to go to a lot of sessions and gather a ton of information. Then there's the people who will go and say, oh my gosh, that was a great conference. I didn't go to a single session. And because they're there for the conversations and that sort of thing. And so we just thought about a lot what that looks like, and the shorter, more interactive sessions have been a central part of that for sure.
So
but I echo your point, Chase. I'm absolutely not trying to market DLAC. That's not the goal here.
No, but I think that it's important for us to at least know this conference. It's so good. I was really disappointed to miss it this year. I do have a question. So this is the first time I've ever missed it, and it seems like from year 1 to year 2, there was a shift in the people who came. And I'm sorry, I'm going off script here to ask this, just a random question, but it seemed like we really saw a big group of district educators that were coming,
Yeah.
and then some international even. So international and private schools and everything. What was the field this year? Was there another shift from group to group that you saw a large influx of people coming?
First of all, what you perceived between year 1 and year 2 was exactly accurate. The thing that happened in year 1 was between the point we started planning DLAC. By the time we were able to get things arranged, like contract signed for the venue, just to make sure that we could start to talk about it, and thinking about when you're running an education conference, you're actually very limited in when you can put it on because of the school calendar and testing and spring breaks and things like that. And so we found ourselves between the point that we could announce it for the first time and when DLAC was actually running for the first time was something like 8 months. And so one of the things I've had to learn myself is take your own advice and listen to your own counsel, because I don't know how many times I've told people school cycles to buy anything, to make decisions, they're incredibly long. I think you all know that, right? Now, partly we were just forced into that short time frame, but what in fact happened was we were able to get folks like the charter schools in that first year, charter schools, state virtual schools, folks like that, not running through your traditional district channels. And we didn't have a lot of mainstream districts because of that. And part of it also was there were a fair number of folks in mainstream districts who said, okay, looks really interesting. We know enough about Evergreen or about some of the folks that we had involved that we think that we want to go, but we're only going to send one person. We're not going to risk sending more people. And then in year 2, we increased the number of mainstream districts that we had up to about 100 different districts. And the total numbers went up by a lot as well, because not only was it a significant increase in the number of mainstream districts, but also in the number of people that each district brought. So that we grew by about 80% from year 1 to year 2, from a little over 500 to a little over 900. And the mix that we wanted really we came much closer to the mix we wanted. Then year 3 was COVID year. So we were capped. We had 500 on site in Austin and 700 online in 2021. That was it was somewhat in between year 1 and year 2. What we found was the district people were just pretty exhausted at that point. We still had a pretty good turnout. This year was really solid in terms of the mix that we wanted. online schools, hybrid schools, mainstream districts, charters, private, state agencies, mainstream districts, just across the board. Very, very much what we're aiming for.
John,
Awesome. Brandy, I think
I have a question for you, John. You mentioned the digital learning collaborative that you have, and I'm in the community space and really new in it. So I have just started in the last 2 months. Can you talk about how you foster that community and how you run that line of business?
With great difficulty.
I'm sure.
We are, right now, I actually just hired a new person to focus on that because, so let me back up and give a much broader answer to that question. As an organization, and me professionally, I've always been better and more comfortable at doing a small number of relatively large projects than doing things at scale that involve small payments, let's say. And so in fact, DLAC was completely different for us because typically consulting projects over the last few years, we've gotten to the point where it's very rare for us to consider anything under $50,000. And usually it's closer to $100,000 for us to consider it. Just because, in part because that's the way my brain works. Like I can conceive of how a big project works and you don't have to worry about all the friction of invoicing and just the sorts of things that can cut into small value, relatively smaller value projects. And so DLAC bringing in, attendant registrations at $500 to $600 each was a very different thing for me to think about. But that works because everybody knows what a conference is and you can hire lots of people, logistics companies and folks like that to do all that. And we also hired people who are very experienced at running conferences. When we started the collaborative, we started it with a group of primarily of companies funding it at the level of $25,000 per year. We were, I think the term of art is vaporware. We were selling vaporware. And the first place I sold that vaporware was the Strongmind offices. And I don't say like, oh, they were stupid to make that decision. It was the opposite. I'm incredibly grateful to Strongmind, Pearson, K-12, a bunch of others who said, yeah, we're in. And for those of you who know our space, there was, without going too deeply into it, we had a real strong tailwind in our backs because there's an organization called inaugural, now the Aurora Institute, which used to do what we're doing now and got out of that space, which meant that we didn't have to, it's kind of like when somebody starts something new, they always want to say something like, well, it's like Uber, but for X. Well, for us, it was kind of like saying, well, it's like Uber, except Uber doesn't exist anymore. So we're actually doing Uber, right? And so it was very easy for people to say, oh yeah, I get it, because there was this organization doing this thing. And so when we started the collaborative, it was based on these companies putting in these relatively large amounts of money for membership. We were then bringing in districts, but we didn't have to charge them very much. In fact, a lot of them we were just comping because we needed a wide range of organizations. Then the next thing that we did, because we have, like Chase mentioned, is policy work. We've done a lot of policy work as well. The next membership type, which we brought in these state affiliates, which are a lot of state agencies, state virtual schools, and folks like that, each of them paying $5,000. Obviously not as much as $25,000, but there's 50 states and we've gotten about them at this point. So that's a non-trivial amount of funding as well. The third piece is we officially tied DLAC and the Digital Learning Collaborative so so everybody feels like, hey, there is a community, even if it was only getting together once a year. Now, having said all that, and finally really getting to your question, Brandy, we are now, and we have made what are almost certainly some missteps around what's the right community platform, how do you do things like automating renewals, all those sorts of things that have to happen if you're talking about individuals coming in at $125 a year, which is our rate, and schools and districts at $500 to $1,000, rates like that. Those are just numbers that those processes and systems have to be super solid and really, really in place. And one of the things that we found is that the different tech platforms for memberships tend to do one or the other well. They either tend to be fairly good from a technology standpoint at fostering an online community, or they do these other admin things really well. And it's been really hard for us to find a system that does both. And so we're basically starting over from a foundational perspective to figure that out. Now, to at least give you a better answer than I have no idea, we're figuring it out. A couple of things that we do is we hold monthly, we have this executive group, but we've had it grow quite large to close to 50 organizations or so now. And we hold monthly discussions that we invite 2 people from each member organization to take part in. They're over Zoom. We do 3 calls so we hold it once a month, the 4th week of every month, and we hold 3 calls that week. So because 50 times 2, 100 people, that's way too many to have a discussion around. So what we do is we say, okay, we're gonna hold it 3 times. You can show up at any of those 3, here are the 3 times. And we have a really in-depth discussion around both, we split them into about half the time, what are we doing as a digital learning collaborative? What do we want to do, so that they're getting input into that? And then we spend the other half taking on a topic that is relevant to the field. So for instance, the last month we were talking about teacher shortages. How do you think about teacher shortages? How are the organizations that are our members addressing it? For some of them, it's an opportunity. For a lot of the companies, it's an opportunity. For a lot of the districts, it's one of their biggest challenges. For folks like state virtual schools, it's a little bit of both. So we cover things like that. Previous month, we were talking about how during the pandemic, every district went to emergency remote learning. How do we think about all the confusion about what's online or hybrid learning, well implemented, well planned versus the emergency version? And so we were building those through these monthly real-time discussions. We've also been putting out the usual, fairly usual stuff, webinars, real-time discussions, things like that. What we are finding so far is a lot more success around real-time discussions than asynchronous. Things like just discussion forums are hard, and there's a real chicken and egg issue between, we've got several hundred members of the collaborative so far. It's still those online discussion forums are really nascent, and we're still trying to work on those. And final thing I'll say about this is we're really investing in them, because I feel like if you say, hey, you've got this forum, and somebody goes and posts and they hear crickets in response, in my view, you lost them forever. They're never going back. And so we've got people who are going in, reaching out, contacting them, answering those questions. It's highly inefficient at this point, but it feels like the investment we have to make.
That was really helpful. Thank you, John.
Sure.
All
Chase?
right, so we've got a couple questions, John. Let's start with the old business failures. Tell us a little bit about that, and how can we learn from it?
Well, I'll go back to what I said earlier, which was really about in my case, that social mission. I imagine a lot of you are if you're in this field, you probably feel some sense of social mission. And I was running this eco travel company, and I don't want to get too deeply into that just because it would burn a lot of time, but it really had a social mission about bringing ecotourism dollars into some areas of Central South America that we thought would benefit from those. And the bottom line was, I didn't spend enough time focused on the health of the financial health of the business, and didn't make some hard decisions around that, such that I had to shut it down, and because it was just bleeding money. Now, it was also the case that this was back in, we were starting it in the mid 2000s, and the 2008 recession hammered us. We felt like we were on an upswing then. Hard to say what would have happened if that recession hadn't hit. But I know that I wasn't focused enough, first and foremost, on the business health. And so I would say that is one thing that I believe really strongly. Here's the other thing I realized about myself afterwards. I kept making the same mistake over and over again. And I've watched other people do this, because there may be an element of a business that you really like to do. And you think, okay, if I just keep doing this, I'm going to dig myself out of the hole, right? And in my case, in this travel example, what I was really good at was creating really good itineraries across unique destinations in Central and South America. So for example, National Geographic Traveler gives an award for 50, they call it 50 trips of a lifetime. We got 2 of those, which was pretty impressive for a tiny, tiny, tiny organization like ours. And so we were really good at doing that, right? But that wasn't what we needed. We needed to do more sales and more marketing and lowering costs and all those things. But instead of being honest with myself and saying, I need to do these things that I'm not very good at, I was like, okay, if we just have a few more really good trips, then we'll get past that. I'll give a generalization here. This is a huge generalization, and there's a bit of a gender bias in what I'm about to say, but I think it really rings true. Because there's a couple of things that I do for exercise in addition to, I live in places where I can ski and bike and that sort of thing. But if I'm exercising inside, sometimes I'll go to a gym and lift weights, and sometimes I'll go do yoga, right? Yoga, there's strength elements of yoga, but it's very much about flexibility, right? Lifting weights is more about brute strength, right? Okay. Generally speaking, women are more flexible, men are better at lifting heavy objects. It would actually make a lot of sense if you went to a yoga studio and you saw a lot of guys in there, because being flexible is not what they're good at. But you go to a yoga studio and what you typically see is a lot of women. They're working on what they're already good at. And you flip that around and you go to a gym where guys are lifting weights. What are they doing? Well, they're trying to lift 5 more pounds, even though they've already got that capability. And I think a lot of people tend to do that. They're like, okay, I'm really comfortable in this area, but especially if you're a small business, what you have to be able to do is do a lot of things really, really well. And what that requires is that you're really honest with yourself and you say, okay, this is what I'm not very good at. And I'm going to face the fact that I'm not very good at it and maybe a little uncomfortable about that. And do one of 2 things: either get yourself to a basic level of proficiency or figure out, I'm never going to get good at that and I'm going to outsource that and somebody else is going to do it. And if you're not honest with yourself about that, you'll flounder. At least that's what I did, by making the same mistakes over and over again instead of facing those head on.
Yeah, that was really good, John. It really, your example really drove home that point that you're trying to make. Before we move on, are there any questions for John around this part of it? I don't want to go on if anyone has a question. Okay, perfect. All right, so John, the thing that actually drove us to having this conversation today was the next, I don't know why it's not progressing here. Here we go. This is the question that I actually reached out to you about. And I don't know, what was that, 3-4 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And I said, hey, here's my problem. I've got 2 companies, and I get that some of us in the room might not run into this problem. Hold on, another topic's coming down. But for those of us consulting, I had 2 clients that were like businesses, right? They did similar things. And my question was, how do I work with both while ensuring that I'm not, A, creating a legitimate conflict of interest, while B, not losing business because of a perceived conflict? And John, you've been so good at walking that fine line. I was wondering if you could just talk to us a little bit about that.
So there's a couple of things. First of all, we explicitly say we don't do sales and we don't do business development. And part of the reason is because of these conflicts. Because if you're doing sales or true business development, which is really tied to very, very directly tied to revenue growth, I do think that may be pretty difficult. And Chase, it was after you and I talked that I was reflecting a little bit more, because I think I didn't really mention that aspect, and we didn't get a chance to talk about what your exact situation was. And afterwards I thought, okay, I probably didn't give Chase a good enough answer, because if you're doing sales, yeah, that's really, I'm not sure you can do that. I think if you're doing sales or biz dev, probably what you need to do is think about what are your verticals and only have one significant client or partner in each of those. Aside from that, there's a huge amount of value that you can provide to a client without getting to the point where you're actually involved in sales or that kind of business development. And what I've always just gone in with the attitude, we work with everybody, and if you want to work with us, that's the deal. And one of the things that I'll say, even, you know, I was, for whatever reason, I was saying that before I really had good reason to say that, but I just felt like it was really important. And the thing is, nobody else knows what's in your business, right? And that certainly doesn't mean you're going to lie about it, but you don't have to explain yourself either. And I'll give you another example of that. I'll sometimes work with, I've known other people who will get into a deep engagement with somebody, and they'll start to make it sound like they're always available. And I always felt like that's a huge mistake. You just made yourself sound like an employee, and you never want to be an employee if what you're trying to do is build a business. And so I would always just make it clear, got lots of clients, I'm going to be super available. And, you know, maybe you work that into whatever your arrangement is, your contract and that sort of thing. But you never set up a situation where they start to feel like if they call you at 11 a.m., you're just going to pick up the phone, because you're just establishing the fact that in their mind, at least, whatever your reality is, in their mind, you're working with lots of clients. Again, never lying about that, but that's what you do. You work with lots of folks, you know, and that's what you're aiming to do. So that's what you're saying. In the conflict of interest area, I would just say we work with lots of folks. We are very good at not sharing information. Always offer up signing an NDA or whatever they want. Always put it in terms of, I'll sign whatever you want, you know, within reason. And I'm sure it doesn't have, you know, in the early stages, they'll just say, more than glad to sign an NDA. You just send whatever you have to me. We're happy to work with yours. And it's very rare that there's some element of it. As long as it doesn't look for exclusivity, it's rare that there's any element of it that we're worried about. And obviously there's a few of you that I don't know, but the ones of you that I do know, I think you all have that kind of reputation. That you say that, and you say it with a level of expectation. You know, it's just like, this is the way it is. This is what we do.
Love it. Any questions for John on this one? Contracting with like businesses. All right, perfect. So this is another piece that you've touched on it already, but if you could go into it a little bit more in detail. You know, we talked, the whole purpose for setting up this group was about my not being happy with QuickBooks, and you and I talked about that as well. I know there are other people who struggle with some of these pieces. So can you answer the question of what should we be thinking about when we consider, is it worth outsourcing to someone else? Or should I be trying to save those dollars and spend my time? So explain that to us a little bit.
So first of all, people, you're all presumably in different places in developing your business. One thing that I will say though is I have seen some people make the mistake of feeling like, okay, you know, just to use round numbers. In my last job, I was making $100,000. Therefore, I need to make $100,000. Not the right way to think about it. Not even close. You should be thinking about, here are all the things that I need to do to build a business, and what I'd like to be pulling out of the business is $100,000. Again, just using round numbers. I mentioned that, I think it was in the chat window, when I was getting started, I had a smaller group than this, and it was much less formal. Zoom wasn't a thing back then. But there were people that I would talk with routinely. There were just several of us who were starting around the same time. And somebody along the way gave me the advice of, get a bookkeeper, get an accountant, get a lawyer. And I heard it multiple times, and I heard it just like, those should be non-negotiables in your head. And I so strongly believe that. You should be thinking in terms of, I need those things, those need to be budgeted as I think about the business, and I need to never worry about those things again. And Chase, I didn't, we talked about QuickBooks when we talked a few weeks ago, and then you mentioned it again here. That was actually the thing that drove me crazy too. Because you just, you end up screwing up. You know, like you're working on stuff. I mean, I should say for myself, bookkeeper, lawyer, accountant, Brandy.
So John,
Yeah.
can I interrupt you and just share a story really quick?
Yeah, please.
Like 1099s were supposed to go out by the end of January. And because I don't have a bookkeeper or an accountant, I'm struggling at the last minute, and happened to talk to a friend of mine who is an accountant, and she saved my butt at the very last minute to help me get them, because I didn't have QuickBooks is my nemesis as well. And yeah, John, that's the best advice. I'm actively already pursuing a bookkeeper and an accountant.
Yeah, you'll waste so much time. Let me give you a recent example. A few months ago, I got a letter from the IRS. We've discovered a mistake in one of your old tax filings. You owe $27,000. As like, I don't think I owe 27. I hope I don't owe $27,000. I called my accountant. I called my bookkeeper, and I spent literally 7 minutes on this. Now I paid them something for it, but they had the records. They had super solid records, because that's what they do. And they cleared it up, and it didn't cost very much. So it's not only the question of, would I have managed to pull off my tax filings 3 years ago? Maybe, maybe not. Would I have the super solid records so that I would just call the IRS and say, here it is? And yeah, like zero chance, because I'm not that organized. And so there's a couple of things going on here. One is, if you're doing your own books, unless you've got a background on that, you're figuring stuff out, you're wasting time that you're using time inefficiently. So I'd say that's number one. Number two is, many of us, I'm certainly in this position, are trying to convince other organizations to pay me to do stuff that they might think they could do in-house anyway. And so I'm essentially telling them, well, you should be outsourcing stuff to me. So the idea that I'm then going to say, I'm not going to outsource this thing that isn't core to my business, it just doesn't make logical sense. I mean, we're essentially by using expertise in those areas, am I essentially doing, broadly speaking, what I'm suggesting that they do. The third thing in my mind is having accountant, bookkeeper, lawyer. It's like insurance in one sense, in addition to the efficiencies and all that, but it's also insurance against something going wrong, right? And so it's like, okay, are you going to go, if you decide that you need whatever insurance, are you going to get cheap insurance? Well, you're not, because then if your house burns down, they're not actually going to pay, right? And so you need people who are actually really solid, who can back up what you need at the times that you need it, whether it's the 1099s, whether it's a dispute with the IRS, you know, just all these pieces. And if and when you grow, the levels of complexity just keep getting bigger and bigger. Like, my bookkeeper hates it when I have employees from different states, because it's like, oh my gosh, now I have to deal with employment law and taxes and all these other states. I'm like, yeah, well, that's why I pay you. And it would be, you know, I'm saying that facetiously. We have a great relationship and she's wonderful, but it just makes me realize, yeah, that's all just it's a complete nightmare. Brandy, your question of a go-to company for small business owners, so I most recently, I needed a new lawyer, and I live in a small town. I went to the Chamber of Commerce and said, who do you recommend? And they gave me 3 names, and I interviewed them. I was previously, when I first found my accountant, I honestly don't remember how I found them. I've been using them for 20 years now. And it was through some local recommendation. I've always used local people. Yeah, SBA, I see Tilly, your comment. SBA it can certainly be a good one as well. I got my bookkeeper as a recommendation from the accountant. And again, I both times I've been in 2 different small towns, but these folks tend to know each other. So the accountant recommended the bookkeeper, and then there was the advantage that they know each other. And so they're used to sending back and forth QuickBooks files and things like that. And that helps a ton.
I mean, I'll add to that, John. Word of mouth is so powerful in those kind of things, you know, and until you ask, you don't even know. There's a guy that we go to church with, and I know he was a business owner. I said, man, I'm looking for a bookkeeper. You know, what do you got? And he's, oh, Heather, you gotta reach out to Heather. She's fantastic. And so I reached out to Heather, and I'm talking to Heather, and I said, Heather, I don't have an accountant. I don't have, you know, all these things. And she's like, oh, I know someone. Oh, I know someone. And I wouldn't just take those people at face value, but definitely reach out to them and interview them and ask a couple of questions to make sure they're the right fit for your business. But people know a lot of people. You just got to ask. I found has been very helpful.
The other thing too, Chase, I don't spend a lot of money on these folks. My bookkeeper, who's excellent, I don't even know exactly what she charges hourly, because it's not a major cost. It's like $50 some an hour, not that many hours per month, you know, a couple of thousand dollars a month on, again, now a $1.5 million, $1.7 million business. Accountant, I pay them $2,000 pretty much when they're doing taxes, and then a little bit more, because the other piece too, and this is especially true of the accountant and the lawyer, I just call them routinely. You know, I'll have a question like, hey, what about this? And they're not charging for the 5-minute calls, but you know, like recently I had this issue. We've had this issue because we're running DLAC in the Southeast, and Georgia in particular. Apparently the state legislature has passed a bunch of stuff suggesting that I am supposed to make sure everybody I have ever seen anywhere has never hired somebody who's undocumented. I slightly exaggerate, but barely. The districts were sending me stuff saying, you have to sign off on the fact that you have documentation from all your subcontractors that they're not hiring any undocumented people. I was like, and you know, I just have to call my lawyer, like, okay, how do you deal with this stuff? And that, so this stuff comes up that not only is it just a black hole if you try to deal with it yourself, but I have no confidence. Like, how am I going to figure out how that stuff works? And you know, it's the same thing with tax stuff when it comes in. You know, just to give you another example. So we mostly work domestically, but recently, last year, we've been doing some stuff with in Saudi Arabia, and same thing. Like, okay, I have what does it mean to get paid by the Saudi Arabian government? And there's just a whole set of issues like that. And you know, like, I suspect most of you have been with larger companies than I was before this, and it's like there's somebody who dealt with that, right? You know, that's one of the things about going solo or very small business. All of a sudden, you have to think about a whole lot of things, whereas when you're in a larger organization, you just know somebody else is dealing with all that, and you need to build that network in for sure.
Very good. Any questions for John on that one? Okay. All right, we've got like 7 more minutes, John, with you. Explain to us again, you touched on it, but go a little more in depth on the employee conundrum, 1099 versus W-2 employee. How do we really dig into that and move forward?
I've gone in waves over time. So I started with one employee. I was working with other people informally, and one of us would bring in the contract and then sub it. So it was just all contractors. Then I had my first employee, and then built from there up to the point where, like I said earlier, I had 8 or 9. Then I started cutting back mostly through, not entirely, but mostly through attrition. And because I just got to the point where having a payroll that I felt responsible for was getting to be something I wasn't really comfortable with. And now it's starting to build that up again. I think a few things come to mind. One of, I would say still to this day, if I can identify a project that I know I can outsource some pieces and I can do it in a financially feasible way. Outsource as in subcontracting, I will still do that a lot, because in my mind, that's just a very solid way to do things. Project comes in, it's $100,000 project. A lot of times I'll think, I will sometimes think just in terms of, okay, I need to keep 30% for the business. I'm going to put some percent into what I think employees are going to work on, and that leaves X percent for contractors. And in fact, a lot of times that's about a 30-30, a third split. And what that allows me to do is, on consulting projects in particular, what I'll very often do is I'll aim, and these days usually can do this, write a very specific scope of work that says, okay, here's the 5 deliverables, here's when they're happening, here's when we're getting paid, that sort of thing. Which means if I can do that with a client, then I can turn around and do essentially something very similar with one or more subcontractors. It's like, okay, we've promised 5 things, this subcontractor is handling 3 of them on this timeline. You know, that just brings in a level of certainty. It's also the case that then, of course, you're not necessarily building the organization's expertise. And I think there's just, I would not ever say one is better than the other. I think so much in contractors versus employees, I think so much depends on what your own business situation is. So for instance, ever since we started DLAC, now I've got 2 people on as employees who are employees, one who's almost 100% DLAC and another who's largely DLAC, because I feel like, and there's other things that we're outsourcing on the DLAC side around the conference logistics and that sort of thing. But there's a lot that I feel like we want as core in-house expertise as well. So that's come into play. Final thing I'll say about this, and I feel like I'm not being very useful because it's like, you can do either. And sometimes it feels that way. But one of the things I've done a lot is I am basically never hiring somebody now that I haven't worked with as an employee. So a lot of times, even if I'm thinking about somebody, feeling like, okay, I might like to hire that person as an employee, we're going to start with a couple of contracts, and which just gives you a very low risk way, or relatively lower risk way, to evaluate that person. Because there's, if anybody has a good sense for how to interview and hire people, please let me know, because I'm still trying to figure that out. Everybody's, you know, if you've been working for a little while, you're going to have some good references. You're going to have some good stories. I don't know. I've never been able to really nail how to figure that out with somebody until I work with them. If anybody has anything to add about that, I'd love to hear it.
No, I think that's a really good point, John. I do. I think that's a really good point.
Tamara, I've had people send me writing samples, and then once we start working together, I feel like they apparently didn't write that that example. You know, and you know, some of these are published things, and I just feel like, okay, there was somebody else who either did a huge amount of editing or something, because what I'm getting isn't that level. And like I said, I just don't know how to, I don't know how to get past that. It's just the reality.
Yeah. I'm just curious, of those of us that are here, has anyone done that where you've hired someone as a contractor prior to hiring them as an employee? Emily, yeah, I see your head shaking. Good. I know I have.
Yeah, my people are all contracted right now, just because I'm so small and just starting out. But then looking at those who are effective, maybe moving them to salary next year.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Awesome. John, sorry, go ahead. You got more?
The last thing I was going to say, and that I've started to realize that something that I think is obvious to a lot of business owners actually isn't obvious to everybody, which is you have to know your numbers inside out. And I say that because I've recently had some conversations with people where I realize, oh, they don't actually know their numbers inside out. And I can tell you, I'll use again DLAC as the example. Like my folks will say I'm totally obsessive. You know, like I'm watching every registration come in. I'm watching every sponsor ship come in. I've got somebody doing the budget, and I'm bugging her every week. Like, okay, what are the latest numbers? And it's it's surprising to me. It just feels like such second nature, but even as I'm talking, I'm thinking, okay, maybe I wasn't, clearly I wasn't like this on the travel business, right? And so even as I'm saying it's obvious, it wasn't obvious to me when I failed at that business. But just having such a sense, and by the way, so the other thing I'll add is the things that, so what I do with my bookkeeper, and this becomes central in our growth, is we're basically looking at three numbers, and we look at three numbers every couple of weeks with my bookkeeper, which is how much cash do we have in the bank, what's the P&L for the year to date, and what's our cash flow projection. And the cash flow projection is really the key. And so she's built out a spreadsheet. And I actually had a part-time CFO a while back who helped build this out. And so if you're looking at contractors and especially employees, having that cash flow projection is what really helps us for that planning. And that cash flow is typically we run it on a calendar year, because we're running on a calendar year. Fiscal year is the calendar year, and then late in the current calendar year, we start building it for the following year. So that's the way we do financial management. I'm looking at Emily's comment.
Yeah, John, you said cash in the bank, cash flow projection, and what was the third thing?
P&L, profit and loss,
P&L. Okay.
just to give us a sense for how we're tracking against prior years.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, because and that also becomes especially more important if you're starting to hire employees and then have a payroll, because Tamara, I think you mentioned that you're thinking about shifting some people to employees. Just to give you one other, just a little bit more detail on that. I was at that point where I had 8 or 9, and then that dropped off. The point it dropped off was, I still remember this. I went into a potential client meeting, and for the first time ever, I had felt like I need to land this project because I had a payroll to meet, and I hated it because always before then, and for the most part since, I can honestly go into existing clients, potential clients, and say, here's what we do. Maybe we're a good fit, maybe we're not. I am never going to try to sell you on something where I'm not convinced that we can help you. That meeting, I went into it feeling like, I got to get this. Whether we're, if we were clearly a terrible fit, I wasn't going to do it. But I was going to be in that situation of we're going to try to make it work. And I didn't like that. And that, that's the difference between having contractors and employees. And so,
yeah. Well, so John, I don't know if you know what I'm doing.
I don't. I'm super curious.
Okay, so I'm running a company that is started to develop a series of micro schools. So I have to, and teachers are not really all that keen sometimes on being contracted. So,
yeah.
And I need the teachers for the kids to make the difference. So long story short, yeah, I'm in a little bit different situation where my employees, need to be probably salaried.
Yeah, I understand. Well, okay, so yeah, and then of course, we didn't touch on in this discussion at all. I've grown the businesses very slowly, such that I've never gone for outside investment. And I mean, there's just a bunch of things going on in the background that everybody has to consider what their own situations are, right? Yeah. So first of all, early stages, in the very earliest stages. So first of all, I've never had kids, so I never had to worry about like, okay, how am I feeding the kids? Second thing is, for the most part, I've had a partner who had a salary job, and that was that. The reality was I never really had to fall back on that, but boy, mentally it's hugely valuable, and I never had to seek outside investment. And clearly, everybody's in different situations around all of those elements, and so. Yeah, I mean, I can imagine what you're doing investment probably is, if you don't already have investors, I'm sure it's something that you're at least thinking about, and it's just a completely different type of business.
It's my husband's inheritance.
And so, yeah. And so the other piece to add to that is DLAC was the first thing that I did that I had to invest in. And that was my house. If DLAC had failed, that was the house. But that kept me from ever having to answer to investors. And it wouldn't have been something, and when I was early on running the business, I always viewed my house as my source of cash. And so I was paying it off at really, really aggressive rates. I refied to a 15-year very, very early on. And then I was paying way beyond that, so that pretty quickly I had hundreds of thousands of dollars of home equity that I could tap into. And so that was the thing. After I had the issue with being worried about employees, and then when I started to build up the employees again, I felt like, okay, I need to not be in that situation again. And my answer was to go get a line of credit against my home equity. And and again, I know that's different for different people. Everybody's in their own situation, but that's what I was able to do.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Chase, thanks for the opportunity. It's fun to talk to folks, and I'm glad to do it anytime. You should feel free to give my info out. Like I said, I had a lot of people that were really, really helpful for me when I was in the early stages, and I'm more than glad to help. And I know this is education, folks, and those of you who I know, I hopefully know you can reach out to me anytime, and those who I don't know, assuming you're in the education space and anything that we're doing might be of interest, more than glad to help on the specifics as well.
John, your number's still the same?
Yep.
Okay, good. I will reach out to you and send you some information, and then give you a call so we can connect. That
sounds great. Yeah. Are you still in Arizona?
Still in Arizona, but my sister's in the Springs and I have to go up and visit her soon. So.
Well, I am actually in Arizona now for a bit.
Oh, okay. Then let's get together.
Yeah. My wife's about to have surgery on Thursday. So it'll be a couple of weeks, but yeah.
Okay. Oh, Tilly, I did see that. Yes. And I'm dying to meet you face to face.
Yeah. Chase, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, John. I appreciate you.
Okay. Take care, folks.
Thanks, John.
Bye.
All right. Perfect. I hope that was helpful. John has been a good friend, and I've worked with him on many projects over the years. So he's sincere when he says reach out if you have questions. Feel free to reach out. I'll make sure to pass along his info. All right. We've got 25 minutes left, which should be more than enough time to get to know each other. And I just realized while he was talking, I did the little get to know Chase thing at the front, but I didn't explain my picture at all. With a helmet and an In-N-Out hamburger. And I feel like that's probably important. Mara knows the story.
I'm going to find the other picture, Chase. You know what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
Keep going.
So my thing, right? Everyone needs a thing to unplug and kind of not think about work or anything else for a little while. So my thing is I love to go for really long Vespa rides. I've driven up to Oklahoma City to visit Emily on the old Vespa, and that ride, it was a great trip too. It was a ton of fun. That specific ride was the first time I ever did an iron butt, and that's a motorcycle ride thing, not really meant for Vespas, but I did it on a Vespa anyway, and it was 1,000 miles in 24 hours. And as I was crossing that 1,000-mile mark, I looked over to the side, and there was an In-N-Out. Well, granted, when you're on a Vespa going 1,000 miles in less than 24 hours, like you don't have time to stop. Time is like an actual thing you have to think about. And so as soon as I crossed that 1,000-mile mark, I was like, okay, I'm starving. And so I pulled over, and that was my success moment that I made it. And if you ever come to Northern Texas, I've got the little certificate because that's all you apparently get when you ride 1,000 miles. But that's my thing. So explains the picture.
This is probably the outfit you were wearing, right, Chase?
Oh, please.
I literally saw this one day driving, and luckily my husband was driving, so I took a picture and asked Chase if he was driving his Vespa here in Arizona.
I think it's important to note that is not me wearing the bunny outfit, but he definitely likes to pretend like it is. I've not done that. Okay. moving on. I want to get to know you, and I'm going to show the 4 questions. And my request is that we keep this to like 3 to 5 minutes. So today we're not going to get a ton of time, but then subsequent meetings, you're going to get a bigger chunk of time to really kind of deep dive in. Here's what my business is. Here's where we're doing. Here's where we're going, that kind of stuff. But for the first time, just a quick intro, 4 questions. Who are you? Where does your expertise come from, or what is your superpower? And then answering the question, I exist to, or my business exists to blank. And then since starting, what is one piece of advice you would give to other edupreneurs? All right. And I'm gonna remove this graphic so we can see each other bigger. So if you want to maybe snap a photo with your phone or something. 4 questions. Who are you? Where does your expertise come from? What do you exist to do? And since starting, what is one piece of advice? All right. Perfect. Everyone got it? All right. Perfect. We're going to go from my screen left to right. So we'll start with Brandy. Brandy, answer these 4 questions for us.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Brandy, and I am out of Washington State, actually the Spokane area, so just north of Spokane. I don't have a Vespa, but since I married my husband, I've been riding dirt bikes with my husband. He how to do it on his ranch on a huge manure pile. When we first met, we were madly in love, so I didn't see anything that was going on around me. He bought me a dirt bike before I had children for Mother's Day, and then we started taking them, and it's just been a love story ever since. And so I do ride in the Pacific Northwest Mountains in my free time. And I'm a teacher. I always knew I was going to be a teacher when I was 7. I was in the field for about 5 years and realized that my passion was teaching adults, not teaching children. And so I decided that I needed to do that. And so I started in gifted education, and I did that brick and mortar for 5 years, moved into the online space in a K-12 school. So I was teaching kids online in 2002, before that was even a thing. And I was there for 2 weeks, decided I wanted to build a gifted program. And so I did that because I was realizing that we were getting kids from the 2 different ends of the spectrum. We had a high level of special ed kids and a high level of gifted kids. And so I started the first gifted program, I think in the nation, that was done virtually back in 2002. And then went back to school. I told my mentor, hey, I want to teach adults. I want to do this for a living. What do I need to do? And she said, Brandy, you are a young 20-something-year-old. You need credibility. Go back, and you have 2 options. You can either write a book or you can get a PhD. So I called up my friend and said, hey, you want to get a PhD? It'll be really fun. It was really a lot of work. It was a lot of fun too. We took every class together, but the dissertation I thought almost killed me. And so I earned my PhD, started doing some consulting back in 2012 under Gifted Resources, and then moved from the education world, knowing that I wanted to teach adults, into the corporate world, the corporate side of K-12. And so I started by teaching teachers, and then I was doing teachers along the West Coast, and then moved into corporate because my PhD is in leadership. And so I did leadership development. That's how Chase and I met until about 2020. I believe 2019 or 2020. And then I decided I went in and did a stint for a year at a small private school as a director of gifted education, and then got in at my local school. They said, Brandy, we want you to come in. I was working virtually now for almost 20 years. Like I mentioned, it's very isolating. They said, we want you to come in and teach our teachers how to work with gifted kids, because really they only have 15 minutes inside of their pre-service learning how to deal with gifted kids. And so I started to do that. It was a great side gig. And that's when I started and opened this community. And the community is for gifted families, where they have an opportunity to come into this online environment. The kids spend a couple days a week working with me, 1 hour, where we really are, I'm teaching them servant leadership through stories, through books, stories, different things. We have our own private Minecraft server, so they think it's the coolest thing they've ever been to. And then I support their parents with coffee chats on the side and really grow and develop them as well. And so it's really been fantastic. So I exist to connect people, and I exist to build community. That's all I've ever done. That's my superpower. I'm a connector. I'm really good at it, and it's something that I love to do, and it's something that brings me a lot of energy. I think the one piece of evidence or one piece of advice that I would give others would be to, and this is a good one because I was thinking, what am I going to share? There's so many. I think what I'm going to share is to just constantly be a learner. And so growing this kind of a network, but always asking questions. And so when you find somebody like a John that comes along, I think that truly God brings people in your life and he just kind of sprinkles them in at certain times for you to either give to them or for them to give to you. And I don't think that that happens unless you ask questions. So my advice is to ask as many questions as you can.
Awesome. Brandy, that was fantastic. And I love that even though you're like sick and in bed and dying, you're still like super upbeat and peppy. That's fantastic. That's not how I am when I'm in bed. So I hope you get feeling better soon.
That's true. I think it's the soup is helping and just being here and being in bed. But yeah, it's kind of my personality.
Awesome. All right, Roger, you're up.
Pleasure to meet all of you. Brandy, I love what you shared. My story is actually relatively similar. I went back and did a PhD. I have a doctorate in organizational leadership. About 3 years ago, I started a company called FerskenED Education Group. And this year we surpassed the 1 million in gross revenue. So it's doing well. We contract with a lot of people. We provide a lot of services. We have about, well, we're probably over 1,000 students now who participate in our programs. And basically what we do is we run online curriculum for students K through bachelor's programs. And so we have early college programs where high school students can do their high school diploma and their associate's degrees at the same time. We have a lot of homeschool families who are looking for different types of curriculum, and we provide that curriculum for them. We work with, depending on the state, hundreds of thousands of homeschool families, and some of them just purchase a class, some of them are participating in a whole program, some of them are just getting to know what we do. But we employ a lot of teachers, we have a lot of mentors, we spend a lot of time helping students succeed, and that's what our company is really focused on. It came about because I've been in higher education my entire life. I was working for a number of different universities, both domestically and internationally, and met and worked with a lot of presidents of universities. And as those presidents moved to new projects and things, they would call and say, hey, I've got a new university or a new program or something, and we're trying to figure out how to grow it. And then that's how this company formed, was trying to solve the problems of presidents who were taking on new roles and figuring out how to solve them. And it started out, it was going to be mostly higher education, associates and bachelor's level. And it very quickly grew into K through 12 because of the number of homeschool families that we work with and because of the demand for kind of a college level high school program. And so that's kind of what we do. I love it. I left a job, quit my job and started this company. And when that happened, everybody worries to death that you're gonna be bankrupt in 6 weeks. But it didn't happen. And we're now 3 years in and I'm not bankrupt yet. So life is good. And we're still making progress and growing and doing really well. I will say, Chase, I think it's hilarious that you ride a Vespa. I actually bought one 3 weeks ago. And I wish I had a picture of it. I'd show it to you, but it looks very similar to yours. It's kind of this teal green Vespa that I'm learning to ride and having a lot of fun with anyway. So it's a little cold. I'm in Southern Utah, and so I'm not out there every day, but I have ridden it several times and endured the cold while I did. So
I cannot wait to talk about this more with you.
Yeah, let's. So it's a lot of fun anyway, but I think that's me in a nutshell. Pleasure to meet everybody.
Roger, what advice would you give to someone? Did I miss that?
No, I love the advice that John gave, which is know your expertise and hire people who are not your expertise. And I think that's really been a key for me. I have a doctorate in organizational leadership. And so I think I know everything there is to know about business, but that's not true. And as you start to sit down and do different jobs, there are people out there who are better at it and who can do it really well. And so I rely on them and they rely on me, and we build great partnerships, and that's how we've been successful. And if I try to do everything myself, I don't have the time, I don't have this capacity, I don't have the skill sets to do everything that needs to be done. So it's nice to have the right people to help you do all of those things.
Awesome. Thanks, Roger. Tamara, you're up.
All right. Tamara Becker, been in education 25 years now. I've been a teacher, director of special ed, assistant superintendent, and most recently, the superintendent of the largest online school in the state of Arizona. Was also superintendent of a hybrid school. Had to work with Chase on that one. Chase wasn't, you weren't my boss. As we were in and coming through the pandemic, I saw this opportunity for education to innovate itself and to do something different. I've been in charter and public and private, so I've had experience in a lot of different facets. And when I saw that we went back to doing the same thing in the same way that we've always been doing it, I got sad for the kids because they deserve something better. And they've lost so much over the last 2 years that I threw away my comfy salary and I walked away from a great team that I was working with, and decided to start Adamo Education. And as I mentioned, it's a micro school program. Right now I have one location. And so starting off small, very small, but I started with 12 kids in August and I'm up to 26 kids right now. I have 2 part-time teachers. And I call them this lovingly, I have my motley crew. That is my group of kids. I started in Fountain Hills because there was no school choice in that community. And I am a passionate supporter of school choice. I think it's important because the one size fits all approach to education does not meet the needs of every kid. And so I've in some sense had to tweak the model to make it fit, but that's what it's about. What drives me is the question, is this in the best interest of kids? So if you want to call that my superpower, we can. Chase, you can come up with other superpowers I might have. But if it's in the best interest of kids, then I can get behind it and I can do it. So even though it's not the truest vision of what the micro school concept could be, I'm helping to serve the needs of in a community as well as to serve those students. It's been a challenging first year. Lots of things that I have learned along the way. I would say that when you're starting a business, you have to understand that the level of stress is going to be there. And so you have to find ways to mitigate that and keep yourself centered. I can say that is good advice because that's not what I did. And the starting the business has been really a challenge, but I've also reconnected back with kids. And so working every day with those kids right now helps to breathe in that life and that passion back into what I'm doing. Anything I missed, Chase?
Well, there's so much you missed, but we just don't have time to dig into all your past, okay?
If you guys haven't noticed, Chase and I are the entertainment. We do this. This is us all the time.
All the time, all the time. Tamara, thank you so much. Tilly, lay it on us.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tilly Elvrum, and I am a 20+ year volunteer parent advocate turned education consultant. And it basically what happened was my term as leading a national parent organization was coming to an end. And I knew as an advocate that there was still a lot that I wanted to see happen within the education space. And with some encouragement from others within the movement, I decided to try this crazy thing called consulting, in the hopes that maybe somebody would appreciate my expertise and background. And then COVID hit, and I don't think I've had a full night's sleep in the last 3 school years. So it's been wonderful. And I started an organization, Parent Support for Online Learning, because of COVID. We wanted to support families. We knew the shift to remote learning was going to be difficult for most schools, educators, and families, and we wanted to support them through that. And it's been a fruitful and productive venture. It went from a small Facebook group to a website, and partnering with organizations like Future of School and Vela. And so that's been really wonderful, and continuing to grow that initiative out. Additionally, I've had some contracts with folks in the micro school space, learning pods, then something totally unexpected in the cybersecurity space, and working with some state and federal apprenticeship programs, which has been really wonderful. And but I'm learning, and I appreciated John's perspective today so much. It makes me feel better when I kind of have moments of imposter syndrome or self-doubt, that others have been there, and that I'm going in the right direction, and that I'm thinking about the right things. Like literally this week, I was like, I really need to, I'm at the point where I need a lawyer. And so it's a scary thing, but it's an exciting thing. And so my expertise or superpower, I love the idea of being a connector or a conduit. I love connecting people with others who can help them. And so I love that. I'd also say I'm battle tested. I've been through a lot of fights across the country as an advocate and as a parent. So I understand both sides of what parents go through to get what they need for their kids. And then also those policy fights that we go through to improve education. And then why do I exist? I hope I exist to create a culture of learning. That's what I'd really love to see in every home, no matter what kind of school a kid attends, that there's a culture of learning in their home. And then advice, sell yourself. I'm not great at it, but I'm getting better, and not in the sense like, hey, I'm oh so great, but here's what I do and here's how I can help you. From that conversation comes really good relationships. And also it brings in the work. If people don't know what you do, they can't tap into you as a resource. And that's been once I started doing that, accounts and things started to happen, contracts started to happen. So that's who I am.
And Tilly, can we also add that now you're a solid news anchor or interview person, because I saw all those interviews that you did at DLAC.
I do a little bit of that on the side. And so, yeah, I don't think I'm great at it, but I do it when I have to.
Excellent. Love it. Thank you so much, Tilly.
Yep.
And last, but certainly not least, Emily, thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited that you're a part of our group. Tell us who you are.
Okay, well, I'm Emily Jensen, and Chase and I go back a pretty long ways. We actually went to high school together back in the day. and had not been in touch for a really long time, but I had started a micro school here in the Oklahoma City area about 3 years ago. And I don't remember how, was it through Facebook maybe that you kind of saw what I was doing? And so he had reached out to me about 1.5 years ago and just said, hey, I'd really like to come kind of see what you're doing. And so he came up last year and spent some time with us here at the Beacon School. And Tamara, is that the right way to say your name? When you were talking, I actually almost started tearing up for real, because I totally have been in your shoes. And the first year, I mean, I literally thought I was going to die. Like, it was so hard and so exhausting. And all I can tell you is that what you're doing makes a difference, and just hang in there, even if it's by your fingernails. It's, my journey, my first year was so intense. And then the second year was a little bit easier. And now we're in year 3 and it's gotten so much easier. Just because now we have the revenue stream to be able to like outsource and, pay for people to help do things. But that first year you're doing 99% of the work by yourself, because you don't have the resources to say, oh, okay, like I'm going to hire a lawyer and I'm going to hire all these people. You don't have any money. So, anyway, hang in there. You're doing a really important work, and I'd love to connect with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Outside of this meeting.
As long as you promise to bring a picture of Chase from high school to our next meeting.
I will get out my old yearbook for sure. For sure.
My superpower is to irritate Chase at every turn. So that's.
I love it. No, I will for sure do that.
Okay.
So,
yes. I'll get your number from Chase.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love to connect. So that's a little bit about me. So my background actually is not in education. I studied music ed. I'm a pianist by background. It's kind of a long and wild story, but I thought I was going to be, a musician for my whole life. And I had my firstborn child 8 years ago. And from the moment he was born, I realized I really wanted something unique and special for him in terms of education. And I started being the mom who was like touring all the schools in the area and like doing all this due diligence, trying to figure out what our options were, and just left every school feeling kind of disappointed. And knowing that things could be done better. And I had taught in a Montessori school in Houston, helped run their music program, and had been exposed to a lot of really unique education ideas, hands-on learning and things like that. And so one day I was driving home with my little 2-year-old in the back seat, and I just felt like God was calling me to start a school, and called my husband on the phone, and he literally laughed. And he was like, well, that's an interesting idea. Are you sure? And he said, okay, I'll make you a deal. If you can write a full business plan and show me all the numbers and make sure that it all, all the T's are crossed and everything, then I will consider this. And I did. I was like, challenge accepted. So I spent about 2 years writing up a business plan and like doing all the research and kind of preparing everything, and started recruiting. And it was a long and arduous journey, but that's how we got started. So we started with 15 students, and we have 110 now in our 3rd year. And we have wait lists for almost all of our classes. And we actually just put an offer in on some land to go build our own building, which we're super excited about. So it's been a wonderful journey. I think I exist to maybe give hope to people, to love on people. I feel like with our students, with our staff, one of the big things for me is just pouring into them. We've had teachers come to us who've been kind of burned by like the system of testing and all of that. And it's been a really great privilege of mine to be able to pour into these folks and just kind of help them reignite that passion for learning again, and for teaching and loving on their kids. So and then my biggest piece of advice is just to hang on. It will get better, when things are tough, and maybe they're not tough, and that's amazing. But yeah, that's all I can say is just keep hanging on. God is good, and he always pulls us through. So
I love it. Thank you so much, Emily.
You bet.
Perfect. All right. So what we're going to do, we're over time as of right this minute. So I'm going to skip our housekeeping and rules. We'll come back to those at the beginning of the March event. Does that sound like a good plan? Perfect. All right. The one thing I do want to just reiterate that John said, and I can't thank him enough, how transparent he really was with us, opening up, telling us, revenue, all these things. Please, the one rule that I will talk about today is what we talk about in our mastermind. I want people to be open and transparent because it's so much more helpful for us with more transparency. And we can all laugh, we can all cry about where we have been and where we're going, but please just keep that internal to our group. And that's my main request for this time. All right, before we move from this slide, I do want to ask if you will do me a favor and send me an email today with the level of information that you're comfortable with sharing for the group. And I'll put it all together. Today we only had half of the people that said I want to be a part actually show up today because it was kind of short on time of notice and all that kind of stuff. So there's 6 other people who are likely to join long-term with us. So there's going to be a lot more people to get to know. My question though is, what level? Are you comfortable sharing your LinkedIn profile, a phone number, an email address? If you'll just send that to me, I will make sure to put it all together and get it out to the group at some point over the next week. Perfect. Thank you. The last slide to cover our March meeting. We have a good bookkeeper. If you're looking for a bookkeeper, she is fantastic, highly recommended to me, and I've worked with her now for 3 months. And I can say, working through all of my mishaps, missteps, and mistakes, she has cleaned up all of them. So can't recommend her high enough. The one thing that I asked that she do is not to come and sell herself to you, but that she comes and explains. Most of you, I'm assuming, already have a bookkeeper. So the question is, how do I work effectively with a bookkeeper? What things should I be keeping in my mind as I work with my bookkeeper? And then what things do I need to be thinking about from a tax perspective? Whether that's quarterly or the end of year or whatever, how do I just keep all these things and move forward with them? So she's going to be bringing some tips, tricks, and best practices, some bookkeeping 101, and then answering all of those questions. I'm really excited. She's incredibly friendly. You're going to love her. Last question of the day, and I apologize for keeping you long, but are Monday afternoons at this time, are they good for you or are they not good for you moving forward? For instance, the second Monday of every month. If you could, I guess we can use this as an exit ticket since we're all educators here. If you could just put that in the chat, like yes or no, the second Monday of every month is a good time for me to meet. And that will be really, really helpful for me as we plan out. Perfect. All right. Any questions, comments, thoughts before we wrap this bad boy up?
No, I just, Chase, like to say thank you. I know that you and I started talking about this and, this has been really helpful. And I think everybody's on their own different, journey, but we can all be here to help support one another. And it's all about the kids. So thank you for getting this going, Chase. And thank you for listening to all my great ideas.
Well, I listened to a lot of your ideas, Samara. We're not gonna go there. Hey, thank you, sincerely. Thank you so much for joining. We've got such a unique group of people. You only got six of the backgrounds on that today, but then there's 6 other people that are coming and they've got such varied backgrounds, but all somehow tied into the education world. So it's incredibly beneficial. And I think the more voices we add, the better. If you're thinking there's someone else who needs to be here, please have them connect me somehow with them so we can get them plugged in. I can't see this but being anything but helpful. And we'll bring all of our QuickBook jokes together and it'll be fantastic. Awesome. Y'all, thank you so much. And we'll see you the second Tuesday of March.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Yeah.